Alright, bear with me. You're in Japan, finally. You're in Tokyo, and you are the big manga weeb you are. And that's coming from a guy who's wearing a jumper that says Osaka on it. You go down and you walk to the train station. I'm gonna buy manga how it is bought in the country of Japan. I'm gonna go full native. Go down to the station, you see the magazine bench, you're looking, I'm looking for my boy Berserk. I'm gonna look for Guts, and I'm gonna read the latest chapter. Mostly you want to find Young Animal, because they're the ones who publish Berserk. Scrolling, you're looking, scanning. And here's where you're thinking you'll probably find your boy Guts on the front cover, or at least some other kind of sign in here on the front of Young Animal. No. You find a full cover spread of a very cute Japanese idol girl on the front. That's when you learn Berserk, your favorite or one of your favorite manga, categorized as one of the greatest mangas ever created, unimaginable great contribution to dark fantasy and literature, popular culture, is published in a magazine, a cute idol girl on the front. So let's talk about why that is. The title and thumbnail that got you to this video may be a bit clickbait, but there'll be a reason to why it is near the end. And the idol girls will help me with that. In fact, you'll see them later, so you should stick around if you want to see more of them. Hee. Before I go any further though, I am going to link in the description down below a blog post from a guy called Azil on skullknight.net. It's a Berserk dedicated website, and he created this amazing article I found like 2 weeks ago detailing the history of Young Animal, where it came from, what companies, what timelines. If you want something really in depth like that, I urge you to go read it, because here I'm just going to be giving you the bare bones of the idol girls. Before we get to the girls, we have to talk about manga demographics. So manga is put into demographics in terms of its target audience, similar to how media in other English speaking countries use age guidelines on the front of movies or TV shows like G, PG, MA, or R, is to not only target towards people of that demographic, but also warn people as this is not for you. If you are a kid who loves Toy Story, you're probably not going to be loving the critically acclaimed film Blade Runner 2049. And this is something that Japan does, but not with letters or symbols, but with demographics based on the brand. A little bit of a translation for you. Shonen is something you've probably heard of. When you hear people talk about, oh, I've heard of that series, it's a shonen or it's a seinen. These are not only just genres, they're technically demographics. They are used to target a certain audience when trying to sell the magazines. Shonen, translated to English, literally means boy. Shoujo, translated to English, literally means girl. Young boy, young girl. Since the beginning, shonen was pretty much dedicated towards targeting the young boys, the kids are still in elementary school. They want to hear the stories of the kid called Goku with his monkey tail going on those cool adventures with the girl with the blue hair who's kind of cute. This is shonen, and that is still to this day very much tried and true in what it is they show. And there are a lot of kind of mix between shonen and seinen. It's actually harder now to differentiate the two because of how subversive it's gotten, but that's a video for another day. Shoujo is very similar. It's mostly dedicated towards girls, and it's meant to target that audience with certain stories that they would like. Shonen would usually show sports and adventures. Shoujo would usually show adventure, but always definitely a romantic love story. And it was pretty much the typical target audience. These also weren't rules. A girl could buy a shonen just like a boy could buy a shoujo. Just back in the day in the 70s, that was not really the norm. But during the 70s, stuff took a turn. Certain stories would be published in shonen because magazines and manga were meant for kids, but then over time, adults started reading. And that's when a new demographic was created for the both. Seinen for young adult males and josei for young adult women. And again, very similar to their predecessors. But now they're much more adult stories. They're much more serious, darker tones, much more mature themes involving sex, violence, drama, political intrigue. These were the things that were targeted towards, the same young people who want to read them, but of course a higher caliber. And again, anyone of any age can read these and of course swap between them. A girl who reads josei can read a seinen. I've only read one josei myself, but there are things that you can look at that distinguish themselves. Now, this all correlates back to Young Animal, and the way it works is that Young Animal actually in the beginning, their parent company was Hakusensha, and still to this day, apparently they cater more towards female audiences. The male audiences, the seinen section is actually very small. Now, for Hakusensha to get an in with the shonen demographic, they created Shonen Jets. Now, for some people, they may be confused because Shonen Jump is known as the magazine. Shonen Jump, again, is the demographic, and some magazines name their magazines after the demographic so that they can really capitalize on this is for this demographic. Even though later on, shonen magazines could have stories that have different kinds of mature themes, especially as time went on. Like, for God's sake, Chainsaw Man is technically a shonen. It's published in Shonen Jump Weekly. But it just shows that shonen can be a variety of different stories, basically tailored to what the magazine wants to promote and the age guidelines and how they are promoted. So Shonen Jets was created in 1981 with the first issue right here. Now, it looks very much similar to other shonen magazines around that time. In the 80s, you had big stories like Dragon Ball, Fist of the North Star. These were huge Shonen Jump flagship characters that at the start were very small, but then they just took over. If you look at shonen magazines, not just Shonen Jump, they all share the similarities like Shonen Jets tried to do with a bunch of flashy cool characters doing on a bunch of flashy stuff. Shonen Jets did not actually last very long and only went from 1981 to 1982 into where they decided to rebrand, not into Young Animal, that's actually later. They decided to rebrand into Monthly Kami Kami. Now, different magazines can go by different release schedules. Shonen Jump Weekly, as it sounds like, is weekly. Monthly Kami Kami, like its predecessor, Shonen Jets, followed the procedure of putting out a magazine a month. Monthly Kami Kami did pretty well. It lasted for quite a long time. It went from 1983 all the way to 1988. And during this time, you can see how the magazine tried a different look and approach. And it showed essentially a variety of just one subject characters on the front to appeal to the young adult males of around the ages of 16 up to 34, where you would have a character with a gun on the front, or you would have female characters that were very cute. And in the second last issue of Kami Kami in 1988, that is when the Berserk prototype was published. And as you can see with the later issues that I'm showing on screen, this is kind of the vibe that they were going for. So it could distinguish itself as a very typical seinen magazine. The issue that Berserk prototype was publishing was actually the second last issue that Monthly Kami Kami would do, because again, like I said, they're not known as that today. They rebranded to Animal House. Animal House was again monthly, and instead of showing characters on the front, it wanted to again try and stand out. So instead it would just have this very cartoony, also edgy, almost gorillas-like alligator on the front, essentially to try and entice people to read their stories. And this is around where Berserk would actually, grow, and it would be serialized. It would be serialized in a couple issues, not too many, but this is where it would begin its serialization. Animal House did not last very long as well. It was very short-lived, and it went from 1989 to 1992, to which finally it got its last rebranding with Young Animal, and to which it is known today. But Young Animal didn't start with the cover girls straight out of the gate. And this is where I'm going to get into a little bit of speculation as to why they went this way. If you look at the first issues of Young Animal, they actually have Boronson's work Japan on the front, which Kentaro Miura helped work on. And Young Animal was trying to balance the two things it did before. It would have the cool shonen-esque big colors of Young Animal, flashy colors, characters on the front, but instead of just having male-centric characters, it also tried to balance it with what it did kind of in Monthly Kami Kami with female-centered characters on the front. Now, Berserk was serializing at this time. Around in 1992, we were in the golden age. As you can see by some of the issues I'll show in here, this is what Guts looked like on the front of Young Animal. This one here is especially weird. It's Guts laughing. I never thought I would see Guts represented this way in a magazine, which is, kind of funny. But hey, you got to do what you got to do to try and entice your audience. And over time with Young Animal, Guts would appear now and then on the front cover. I myself find a lot of these amazing. My favorite one is this one from 1993. This one fucking slaps. Interspiced amongst a lot of these magazines, they would predominantly feature more of the female characters from their stories or original OC characters from whatever drawings they were submitted. Eventually, they showed an issue that on the front cover had an idol group. And then after that, they did another idol girl, and then they did a male, and then they went back to an idol girl. And Guts was one of the last issues that had an original manga character as the centerpiece on the front of the magazines before the idol girls just took over. Essentially, from 1993 up until today, That is what Young Animal looks like. Now, why did they do this? Now, there's a couple different reasons as to why they do this. Why do they put these very cute swimsuit model idols on the front? Well, first to establish, idols are celebrities in Japan still to this day that play a very prominent part in terms of the entertainment industry. Idols can be swimsuit models, actresses, singers, hosts, entertainers of all sorts, and into this modern day, they are Instagram models, YouTubers, and so much so even VTubers themselves can be considered idols. But these cover girls proved to be extremely successful in selling the magazines. And of course they were selling it to, people from the ages of 16 to adult males of different ages in their 30s. Of course, yeah, they're going to be successful. Yeah, you're going to look on the front and be like, who's this idol girl? And you'll be flipping through, and guess what you might find? You might find the latest chapter of Berserk and be like, what's Berserk? And then they hook you. It's kind of like how modern YouTube clickbait is actually derived from modern tabloid and magazine covers. My husband killed my dog? And then you have to go read why. And essentially that was the purpose. And you may think that it seems kind of sketchy. It did very, very, very well. So much so that, again, still to this day, Young Animal has never derived from getting rid of the cover girls. Now, of course, you'll find guts in the bottom left corner or the bottom right corner of some of the magazine issues, but most of the time, it's gonna be pretty much the girls on the front, because if they market it towards the demographic of what the young boys are looking for, then they can reel them in and get them to read the stories. Because at the end of the day, magazines are not just an ancillary product for stories, they're trying to compete with other seinen magazines and other seinen stories and shonen magazines in general. Now, that's not to say that everything in Young Animal was, how do we say, critically acclaimed. Young Animal, while even though the front is used to entice people to get to the critically acclaimed stuff like Holy Land and Berserk back in the day, there were a couple stories like, Futari Ecchi. Add to... Yeah. Cool. So anyway, do all seinen magazines do this? Majority of them do this. Majority of them usually have idols or cosplayers on the front to try and entice readers to read them and buy them. Now, there are some that don't. There is Morning Magazine, which I think has since gone digital. They don't really show cover girls. They were the people who kept sticking with it. And funny enough, that's the magazine that publishes or published on hiatus Vagabond. And even Shonen Jump, the company itself, has seinen magazines that it's spawned off to promote to that demographic. And they do it in their own way. Instead of showing cover girls, they show anime girls, like kind of what the monthly Komi did, because it's trying to make sure that its audience stays within its group of magazines. It's like, well, once you're done reading shonen, you're like 16 now. Do you want to read the seinen line of magazines that we got? Like, they're right over here. Do you want to read those? Now, there's actually a whole nother reason besides clickbaiting the audience to do this. It's also to distinguish itself from demographics. Now, there are so many stories in magazines that probably shouldn't be in shonen. For Attack on Titan and Chainsaw Man are in shonen. That's probably not what 13-year-old to 8-year-old boys should be reading or watching by the standard guidelines. But you know what? I probably watched some stuff, and you have probably watched that stuff. Regardless of that, it's more for the public audience, especially parents, especially if they're buying magazines for their kids, to distinguish what to buy, what not to buy. If you see on the front a bunch of idol girls, you probably know that your son is not going to be reading the contents of what is in Young Animal, at least what you want him to read at his age. But if you see stuff like Goku on the front, you probably want him to read some Goku, you know what I mean? You probably want him to read some Haikyuu, maybe he'll get into volleyball, maybe he'll become a superstar. But it was used to distinguish itself in the demographic of a magazine stand. You could look and be like, that's definitely for a certain demographic. This is not. And it was one of the ways that was to make sure that people could read one or the other. Now, is this a good way to market the stories that we read? Me personally, no. I feel like what you want is what you should get, right? But I understand why they do it and still to this day do it. Now, in the rest of the world and also in Japan, they do publish volumes. So you could go just to a manga store, find Berserk on its own in a volume and read it that way. Same here. There are no magazines that you can get straight issue from Japan. You just buy the volumes, you see is what you get. This, I believe, is really just to entice the new readers. How do you get people into something that they're not really aware of, give them something they already know. You yourself have probably clicked on this video because you saw a cute girl on the front, and now you're learning about how magazines were published and the industry standard and the insider baseball of how it happened in the history, which is kind of cool. Also subscribe, but that's usually how you get new people in. It's kind of the way the system worked, and it still proves successful to this day to a degree. Magazines are not as popular as they used to be, especially with a young audience, even in Japan. Japan has since always kept true to the ways of how it does its business. If magazines were always working, they're not going to change that, especially if they keep making money from it. They're very rare to change and do new things, mostly based on how their work culture is set up, the mentality of the society and the way they work there, of always doing the same thing, the same procedure, because if they have to change stuff to make it easier, it's almost not worth changing because the change is too abrupt and too big of a change. There are many different reasons. I'm kind of just, skimming over the surface. I'm sure other people in the comments could talk about why they don't change things, but the magazine industry and how they do this is one of the reasons why the cover girls are still on the front to Young Animal to this day. Even the newest chapters that are released with Young Animal with Koji Mori, they still have the cover girls on the front, and you'll still find Guts maybe in the bottom left or the top right. There is actually, since the introduction of the cover girls, there has only been one time when they decided not to have the cover girls on the front. It was actually in 2021, September 24th. It was the final issue of the last chapter that Miura-san had worked on, the Memorial Edition it's called. It is the only time since then that the entire cover was just Guts and no one else. It was pure black and white. It was Memorial Edition to, of course, bring tribute to Kentaro Miura, who worked with the magazine for such a long time, pretty much his whole entire career. So that's the only time that has changed. How do I feel about this? I'll just give my quick takeaway before we end this video. I feel like this should change. I don't think it ever will, of course, because, girl booba cosplay will sell, obviously. But I do think it's always interesting to show what you will get. When I go to the bookstore and I'm looking at manga, I'm already a little bit self-conscious at what I'm reading. And people looking at me being like, yo, are you reading those Japanese cartoon books? You weirdo. And I know some of you watching probably feel about self-conscious about even buying them and walking down the street with them. You shouldn't, first of all. Who gives a fuck, all right? Anime is becoming cooler, okay? Fuck you. But I don't think I would feel in any way confident if I was reading a magazine with these girls on the front, looking how I look now, beard, long hair, looking there, looking over, seeing cute woman, looking at me looking at her, magazine in hand of this lovely lady on the front, probably not the best look. And that being said, if she's reading a josei that has a bunch of yaoi men on the front who are about to make out, I think things will work out. Because I'll give you guys a bit of gender equality here. I looked at what josei do, which is for, the young adult females, those magazines. They do something a bit similar. They clickbait with the hot, cute male anime boys and the cute male anime boys about to uwu kiss. That in itself is also clickbait. Pretty much the reason why I want to talk about this is because I think it shows a little bit of a humility and understanding of how Berserk is at least seen in the rest of the world, and not only the country it comes from. Because if maybe you are a fan of this channel, you might know how much I've talked about my enjoyment of Berserk and manga in general. Essentially, it has really changed the way I look at storytelling in a way, and is one of the best things I've ever read. But to know that it came from a magazine with a very cute anime idol real life lady on the front kind of makes you think about how much you need to present something to someone so that they might give something a shot, which is kind of funny. But it's something I really wanted to talk about and maybe inform some of you who didn't know this. If you didn't know this, let me know. If you did know this, do you have a copy that you could send me? Because there's this one girl called Ai Shinozaki, and she's so cute, and I'd really love to own a copy. So if you could just send me on Twitter, also follow me on Twitter and subscribe and give a like if you enjoyed the video. And I appreciate if you made it to the end. Please, thumbs up if you learned something. Tee-hee, woo, go buy a magazine. Also, again, go to skullknight.com, blog post by Azil. Way more information than what I talked about in this video. You'll learn something and it's enjoyable. That's all from me, guys. Hope you enjoyed, and I appreciate if you made it to the end. My name's Mugen, as always. Have a good one.